Welcome to Follow Me to the MROP, a podcast dedicated to the journey of the masculine soul and the transformative power of initiation. My name is Brian Mueller. I live in suburban Dayton, Ohio, and I made my rites at Pilgrim Park in Illinois in 2014. I'm your host, and in each episode of our show, I'll sit down with one man who has made his rites, and I'll invite him to tell his story. This won't be an abstract explanation or a theological lecture, just a real conversation about what it was like to cross that threshold at the rites and what changed afterward. Before we begin, a quick word of gratitude. This podcast is brought to you by Choosing Presence. We believe that the greatest gift a man can give his community is his own presence. In a world of constant distraction, Choosing Presence provides the tools to help you stay grounded in the now. If you'd like an easy way to begin learning about the practice of presence, you can download the free Practicing Presence app at choosingpresence.org/app. Now, the Men's Rites of Passage, or MROP, is an experience designed to help men move from the first half of life into the second, shifting from a focus on ego and achievement to a life of meaning and soul. On this show, we just don't talk about the rites in theory, we talk to the men who have walked the path. Today, we are joined by a man who has made his rites, and we're going to hear exactly what that journey looked like for him. My guest today is Bill McElroy. Brother, I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for making the time and for being willing to share your story.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's great to be here, and thank you for doing this work too. To get out personal experience of the Men's Rite of Passage.
Bill, tell us where you're from and how you spend your time these days.
Well, I live in Wayne, Illinois, which is a small town outside of Chicago, about 50 miles west of Chicago. And I'm retired. I was a pediatric dentist for almost 40 years, and been retired be 5 years in June. And so, since then, I like being outside, outdoors. My wife and I like to hike and bike and doing some traveling and things like that. And I also spend, time doing this kind of work with men's work as well through Illumin and contemplative outreach, things like that.
Now let's dive in to talk about the Men's Rites of Passage. The MROP is a unique experience. It's not a retreat or a workshop. It's an initiation. Many men arrive at the rites at a crossroads in their lives looking for something they can't quite name. Before we dive into the why and the how, let's start at the very beginning. When and where did you make your rites?
I made my rites in 2004 at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. Was one of the last ones at Ghost Ranch. Richard was doing all of them there for a while, and then I think it got too expensive, and so they eventually and then we started going into regions. But 2004 Ghost Ranch were my rites.
I imagine Richard was your weaver, and how many men were there?
Yeah, Richard was the weaver, and I believe Stephen Peak, was a ritual elder. I can't remember. I think he was a ritual elder, and we had quite a few. Back then, it was only doing one a year, so we had 120, I believe, 130 men. Pretty big group.
Yeah, those were really big rites, especially at the beginning. Now, I'm going to ask you to think back to that weekend, and what image comes forth when you think about your rites?
What image comes forth when I think about the rites? I guess the biggest thing would be the formation of, it's sacred time and sacred space, the container of the weekend. And, so it wasn't any one thing. It was, the totality of the experience itself, entering into it. I mean, entering into it was one thing, and looking back on it, of course, is a whole different thing. But, that would be the thing that really jumped out the most,
Now, without sharing anything that you consider confidential or too personal, is there a particular memory or an encounter with another man that you had during that weekend that kind of captures what the event meant to you?
Probably the thing that jumped out. I mean, it was when I was going on the rites, I was going into it. I was hoping I would have a mystical experience, a real wanting enlightenment type thing it would mark, this event right here. And then the rest of my life, goes from that point. And while I did have many experiences, I didn't have that necessarily, and maybe because I was trying to create it, as it doesn't work that way. I don't think. I think these things, happen when they happen. The Spirit brings it when it brings it. But probably the most notable thing that happened, which I was not going into the rites looking for this at all, but it was one of the days where you're working with grief in a grief ritual, and in that ritual, I just came to a point where it just occurred to me, just intuitively, that there was some intergenerational father wound or pain in my patriarchal, lineage. And it just hit me really hard. I realized right then, my dad never even spoke about his grandfather. My grandfather, his father died before I was born. He was quite a bit older. But it just hit me right then. He never even spoke about him. And I said, there's got to be this big wound. I could just feel it. And my father and I were not super close. A lot of reasons for that. He was, worked 6 days a week, very busy. I was the oldest of 6. But in any case, I just said, I'm not going to pass this on to my son. And I said, I was angry. I said, it stops with me, like pounded my fist down. And I was in the middle. And then I just said, you know what? Give me all the pain right now. I'll take all the grief. I will take all the pain on right now, and we're going to end this thing. And I swear, I had this huge rush of energy. I can't even explain what it even felt like, but whatever it was, it dropped me to my knees, and I just started sobbing right there. And like I said, there's nothing I was aware of before the rites, but acutely aware of it since the rites, And so I really worked hard on my relationship with my son too, which has improved greatly. We did many things together after that. I made a point of it. I made it just so drew it to my attention,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Now, thinking back to just before the rites, or to even several months before the rites, what was going on in your life? What were the circumstances that led you to decide, I want to participate in a men's rites of passage?
Well, it went back. It was one of these situations where something I wanted to do for a while. I was introduced to Richard. It was really the one that really brought me into it. My spiritual director, this is back in the mid-90s, so it would have been about 10 years before my rites, actually. My spiritual director was saying to me, sometimes when you pray, just listen. Don't say any words, just listen. He didn't even use the word silence. He just listen. And I'm like, well, listen to what? And I couldn't hear anything, but he just listen, just sit and listen. So I was fine, and I was doing that in my prayer on and off for a year. And then I was introduced to a tape series, by Richard Rohr. It was Spirituality Subtraction. I remember I was at a friend's house. He goes, hey, you might like this. And I listened to it. And I get the tape number 3, and this is what he's talking about is contemplative prayer and silence. And he's putting a name to what, I had never heard that term before. Cradle Catholic, but that just contemplative prayer never came up. But it really, really hooked me. And then later I was in a bookstore looking for some things in the children's section. My wife and I were doing some confirmation work in our parish. And somebody had laid down a tape series by Richard in the children's section, didn't belong in that section. I just happened to notice it. And it's the same guy. So I got to listen to this, and it was a men's retreat. And it was on the archetypes, the heroic male archetypes, lover, warrior, magician, and king. And that language and symbology really hit a note with me. And so I got to go to the desert with this guy. And I realized after that, then the next thing was, I don't have any kings in my life. I really noticed I don't have any kings in my life. I've got to change that. And so I committed to one day going to the desert. And in the meantime, then Richard developed the rites in the middle to late 90s. And I saw that, and I thought, well, I eventually have to do this. And it was just a matter of when the time was right. You're taking 5 days off, you're going away, it's expensive, and you're leaving my wife home with the kids and all that. And so it just worked out that 2004 was the right time for me.
How did the people in your life, your wife, your spiritual director, others in your community that you let know about your decision, how did they respond initially to you saying, I'm going to the rites of passage?
Back then, not many people had heard about that or knew about it. I think the men going off by themselves on a retreat like that, there was this notion of, the men are all running around naked in the woods and drumming and yelling and screaming and stuff like that. And it's kind of like a tribal kind of a thing. It was an interesting, the way people looked at it. So I didn't advertise it too much, but some of my small group that I was with, I told them they were going, oh, good luck, have a good retreat. It was more like I think it was like a regular type retreat. I don't think the impactful nature of it, was known to them at the time. So, but my wife was supportive of it. She's in a spiritual journey herself. Like I said, she's a spiritual director, and that we weren't at the time, but, since then we both have went in and got our master's degrees in that. So she was supportive. I have to say she's a little bit like, well, what are you going to get involved in now? Just because I have a tendency to really go at it. And she just didn't want me just to take off on a new adventure and leave her behind, I think, because with the men's work, it's just with the men, and so there was that nature of it. And that still even persists to today a little bit, but, generally she's very supportive of it. She knows it's good for me, so.
You alluded to this a little bit before in terms of like a turning point, the rights, wanting the rights to be that. But when you arrived at the rights, when you arrived at Ghost Ranch, was there something that you were hoping to be initiated into?
Oh, well, that's a good question. It wasn't anything. I really entered into it because the instruction is, when you enter into this, go with the beginner's mind, and try not, and so I was trying to really guard against not having an expectation of really having a beginner's mind and just allow spirit to flow, and so I settle into where I'm supposed to settle in. So I really did not have an expectation aside from what I alluded to before, is that I was hoping somewhere in there would be this mystical, I don't know, that Jesus would appear before me or anything like that, but it would be some type of a mystical wanting experience, with that grief ritual, that was definitely something beyond the ordinary that happened. This energy that rushed through me and dropped me to my knees. I didn't just make that up. I mean, that happened. And so in itself, I guess we would put quotes around and say it was of a mystical nature, certainly beyond 5 sense, three-dimensional linear time world, whatever that was. Not what I had anticipated. And which I think there's wisdom in that, just to go in without expectation. Yeah. So I initiated into, the community of men that would have been, around the fringes. I was hoping to join this community, men that are willing to go deep, and be a man for others. And so that was certainly been around the fringe of it for sure. Trying to be careful not to get too much of a solid expectation. This is what I hope to get out of it. I don't have that much wisdom.
Well, conversely, was there something did you feel some fear? Or was there anything that you were concerned about heading into the rites?
No, at that point, I don't think I really had any fears. I was all in going into it. So I was really anticipatory of whatever would come, and that's kind of my nature, I guess.
Yeah, so you get through the 5-day experience and come to the closing rituals. It's time to leave. How did you feel when you were driving off to the airport or wherever and heading back to Chicago area?
Well, I guess one of the things we talk about in this work is liminality or liminal space. And it's all of a sudden you've been through this experience. And that's really what it was for me. It was, the thing about, it's not like a regular retreat, like you mentioned. It's so experiential, and so it's just the whole thing, the drumming, the circle, the ritual process, contemplation, all these things just create this container that you're in. But it was very liminal for me. The only thing I say is that I was energized and I was charged and I knew it was good. I knew I could trust it, and I knew it was something that was needed. Even like at the airport and on the plane, I was just thinking to myself, this has to go on. We have to bring this I'm from Illinois. So, we have to bring this back to our region. I have to do something. It's not something I can just like, oh, that was a great experience and check that off. I knew that this had to somehow continue. And that was right there from the beginning for me.
It's been more than 20 years since you did the rites of passage. What has changed in your life, practically, relationally, spiritually, in these 20 years, in part, perhaps, because of the rites?
Well, I would say spiritually for sure. It's just part of the process. I'd been on the spiritual journey for quite some time. I kind of had, I don't want to say a midlife crisis, but kind of it's not one crisis that I had, but I had an earlier one. My father died when I was 29, and there were several events for about a 3-year period that were kind of impactful events where things were going south and were not going the way I thought they should go, being, a good Catholic boy and obeying all the rules and doing things right. Why is all this stuff, the proverbial, SH1T hitting the fan, in my life? And I'm like, what's going on here? So I kind of got started on this adult journey right at the very end of my 20s and early 30s. And so I've been on the journey for a while, but it was convoluted. But coming off of the rites, God just became more personal. Not as much of God as other out there somewhere that I would relate to, like as a second person type of a thing. It was getting more personal than that. Not just like a Jesus and me thing, not like that. It wasn't like that at all. It was more, I don't know, there was more of an inner experience with God. It just became more personal than that. It's hard to describe, actually. But But in any case, it was impactful in that regard. And one of the things I learned in this process of the rites and processing it afterwards was beginning to trust my own experience of things, So not so much outer authority as, beginning to develop a little bit of my own inner authority on that. Not that I'm certainly not the end all of everything, but it was different than just being totally everything outer. It was more of a combination of inner and outer for me. Hard to describe that.
Yeah. How did the rites impact your ideas about masculinity, initiation, even the male journey?
Well, first of all, it helped me to see, when I was with all these spiritual generative men coming together and doing their work with each other in small group and in a large group and a ritual process, all that, I really could see, to me, what a healthy masculinity looked like. I mentioned the archetypes before, the king archetype. I had no kings. There were kings there, magicians there. There were mature men there, and you could feel the difference. And so that kind of like highlighted when I would see like what we would call, and there seems to be a lot of that going around right now, the toxic masculine. It really stood out, and I could really, so it really changed my whole idea of, the goal as a king is you have, spiritual energy, but you have an overflow of energy to be a man for others. So you're not there just for yourself and trying to, get me to heaven. And it's just being there to support others on that same journey. We're all in it together type of a thing. That's what I would say as far as masculinity goes, and, it's not that in our culture, it was, at least especially as a boomer, John Wayne or Rambo would have been, the images that we were given when we were young, we were growing up, a little messy, right across Apache territory for you. Yeah. So the whole image of masculinity that was kind of embedded in me really had a shift at that time and since then.
Bill, you're somebody I remember from my rites of passage. You were there. You've been at many rites of passage as a teaching elder, assisting with ritual, just supporting the rites in general. I think you've been there almost every time they've done it in Illinois, except perhaps one year you were sick. But
Right.
Let me ask you, why do you keep coming back? Why do you keep coming back to the rites?
Like I was saying before, just being part of that process, because I know what it can do for a man and how so many people over the years, they talk about the experience that they've had, the totality of the experience. It hits different men in different ways in different places. It's just miraculous to watch that. So there's that aspect of it. It's just the satisfaction you get where sometimes you can just see some of these things unfolding, maybe even that the man can't even see himself, but it's just like, oh, yeah. And that's a real positive aspect of it. And then there's the logistical side of it is there has to be somebody there. There has to be a body there, to set up chairs, and to bring men into the circle, to gather men, try to get them to, settle into the space, to create the sacred container and that type of a thing. It's so crucial to the rites is to do that, is that, draw yourself out of that outer world, the busyness of it and all that, and just bring it all in, form that container. So there's a logistical part of that, of being, the body that's there doing those things, that's a necessary thing, so, but the enjoyment of it is a big part of it too, seeing the process right before you, lay it out right before you that you went through at one time. So.
Yeah, I really hear you. In some of my previous conversations, especially some of the ones I've had more recently, one of the things that comes up is that how supportive the men are that put on the rites, and how some men may have had some trepidation coming into this about what the experience would be like, but they haven't experienced that sort of love and care and tenderness from other men before in their lives. That along with the possibility for transformation that exists in that space, it's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going through it. Each individual has their own process, their own thing they're working through, and you're going through it with other men, may have different issues, but you're all going through it together, so it's that process, the communal immersion nature of it and the experiential nature of it, going through it together, it makes such a difference when you're going through it with someone. I mean, camaraderie makes such a difference when you're going through difficult times like that. I found that in my past, just if you know somebody else is suffering and you happen to be suffering from something, just walking shoulder to shoulder, walking, I almost brings tears in my eyes right now. It's, walking shoulder to shoulder with somebody through that. You totally different issues. Doesn't matter. You're just with somebody. You're not alone. And then the community nature of it, you belong. You belong.
Oh, it's powerful. Our Lumen community is celebrating 30 years since the first rites of passage, formal rites of passage in the New Mexico desert out there at Ghost Ranch. What I'd like to ask you, I mean, you've been around for quite a significant part of that time. How have the rites changed and evolved in your estimation, or what you've seen?
Well, certainly, going from the one time a year, at Ghost Ranch to the regions were just getting started right around the time. In fact, I think at my rites, it was the first or second rites where Richard wasn't doing all the teaching. We had teaching elders, men that have been through the rites come in as teaching elders. There's 3 teachings that are given like that over the 5 days. So that was one of the changes, and some of those men were actually given. And then Richard would come out afterwards and just nuance a little bit, fill the gaps in. But now there's more of a regional flavor, to these things, and each region is different as far as what's just the environment that you're in. In the Midwest here, no mountains. Biggest thing we got floating around here would be like a large anthill, maybe. So it's just a different environment as far as that. But the essence of it, I think is still there. And it has to necessarily change when it went from, Richard eventually, he would come when a region was having their first rites. He would come and do those rites. He did that for us at our 2008 rites. He was there. But then after that, it was, we had other weavers that would come in. And each weaver, brings their gifts, but the essence, it really done a really good job of keeping the essence there. And there's been a decided commitment and effort to keep that there. Things have changed a little bit. Some of there'll be some nuancing to some of the rituals as time and culture change, but that essence though is still there. And so I find that's pretty remarkable. One of the things I like about it. So
I'm going to try something different now. I would like to read a poem that I became aware of from something I read or something I listened to that Father Richard had done. And it's by D.H. Lawrence. It's called, or it's referred to as Healing, I believe. I'm going to read this poem. I think it speaks a little bit to what brings a man to the men's rites of passage, or to the point where they might benefit some from initiation. But I'm going to read it, and I'm going to ask you to comment and see if there's anything that resonates with you. It's called Healing. I am not a mechanism, an assembly of various sections. And it is not because this mechanism is working wrongly that I am ill. I am ill because of wounds to the soul, to the deep emotional self. And the wounds to the soul take a long, long time. Only time can help. And patience and a certain difficult repentance. Long, difficult repentance, realization of life's mistake, and the freeing of oneself from the endless repetition of the mistake, which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify.
I have not heard that poem, but I love it. And D.H. Lawrence was a good, excellent poet. Yeah, I would say that directly applies to a lot of what's going on with the rites and with the inner work and preparing for the rites themselves, and what goes on afterwards. The soul is wounded in many ways. We each have our own woundings in our life experience, And as I mentioned, part of my experience was the intergenerational nature of some of that father wound. Certainly I experienced, it wasn't really a father wound. My dad was a good dad, a good man. It was more father hunger. He was emotionally kind of distant. He was an alcoholic, which I didn't really know until after I actually moved out of the house. It came later, but he wasn't, violent. He was just numbing himself. So I experienced that personally. What is his experience? So that's one of the things that helps you look back and say, well, I wonder what his experience was. So one of the things that happens with all this work is an expansion of your perspectives, able to see various perspectives, not just your own. And that soul work does take a long time. It doesn't just pop out. Some of the woundings that happen to us are really from early childhood that we're not even aware of, and they kind of get shuttled into the unconscious, buried down in there. But, anything like that you bury alive. And it does have an impact on your life. And that's what some of the work is to, and that's why ritual is such a good teacher, because some of the symbols in ritual for me, they really help to connect from my conscious awareness to what is unconscious, what's underneath. Why do I react that way to that? Why does that trigger me? Things like that. And so those are like inroads to getting in there. So I love that poem. I think that would be a good one to send out to people ahead of time. Healing is called. So when we get off, I'm going to go look that one up and add that to my collection.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes as well. Just to wrap up here, let's you and I make a case for someone to attend the Illinois Rites this year, whether they're coming for the first time or they want to come back as an initiator to experience the rites again. It's happening August 12th through the 16th at Pilgrim Park. Yeah, what would you tell a man trying to discern whether or not to come on and join us this year?
Well, I would say to them, trust your intuition on that. There's always all kinds of things that are going to get in the way. There'll be tons of excuses. You can make a big, long list of excuses. And, some of them 5 days away, taken off of work. You only have so much vacation time, all these things. Plenty of excuses there. But this is, I would just say, take this time out for yourself. This is 5 days. It's a little longer than than a typical weekend retreat, Friday night to Sunday noon, type of thing. You need a couple more days in there to kind of unwind some of this stuff and let it get in. And I would just tell you the group of men working and the weaver that's coming in, Jim Clark, that you'll find is outstanding. Joe Lonergan, ritual elder, outstanding. I've worked with these men over the years, and the team, just committed men that are there for you. So where do you find that in the workplace where, you're going to have, a team of, 8 to 12 men that are just there for you and for your process in your life. So I would say, trust your intuition and just, get it done. And then you can always beat yourself up afterwards if you didn't work out, There's plenty of opportunity for that, but probably that's not going to happen. It'll be a positive experience for you.
Thank you so much, brother. I want to say I love you, and I really appreciate your time and the courage in sharing us vulnerably your story and experience at the Rites and beyond. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian. You do a great job with this, and appreciate it. This needed work. It's been great calling you as a friend over the years too, and we will see you there at the Rites as well. So looking forward to that already.
See you in August.
Okay, pal. Take care. God bless.
For those listening who are now feeling a tug in their own soul and are curious to learn more, allow me to share a bit about the history of these rites. The Men's Rites of Passage was originally developed by Father Richard Rohr and was first offered at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico in 1996. While it was supported for many years by the Center for Action and Contemplation, since 2012, Illumin has been the steward of this work, preserving and adapting the rites for men all over the world. To learn more about the history and the theology behind this work, I highly recommend reading Adam's Return by Richard Rohr. If you are ready to make your rites, there are 4 opportunities in the United States and another in the United Kingdom in 2026. The first is in Northern California, May 13th through the 17th. The second in the United Kingdom, July 22nd through the 26th. And in Illinois, August 12th through the 16th. There's one on the East Coast in New Jersey, September 16th through the 20th. And the final one of the year is in Texas, which is in MROP and Umbrales, our Spanish language rites, September 30th through October 4th. You can find details and registration information at illumin.org/MROP or illumin.org/events. Additionally, mark your calendars for Awaken, the annual national gathering of Illumin, taking place November 5th through the 8th in New Mexico. You can find more at illumin.org/awaken. Finally, a special thank you to our sponsor, Choosing Presence. If today's conversation moved you, I encourage you to bring more intentionality into your daily life. Download the Practicing Presence app for free at choosingpresence.org/app. It's a simple but profound way to stay connected to the journey we've discussed today. Thank you for listening to Follow Me to the MROP. Until next time, brothers, stay present.